I'm an immediate physical representation of loss. And as soon as you see me, you will know I've lost. It doesn't matter that I don't have hands and feet. No matter how you see me, I have a God who says I'm whole.
Yeah. Living without limbs would not define Cyndi. God would. Well, I want to welcome you to the Found podcast. It's brand new. This is like, I don't know, season 1, episode 1, whatever we're going to call this thing. And I welcome you. My name is Lorie Hartshorn, and I've written the book called Found, Discover the Power of Your True Identity. The podcast world is new to me, but broadcast is not new to me. And I'm excited to be able to do long form interviews because I'm used to the TV studio and they're so short, but on the podcast, no one's going to put a clock to me. So I want to welcome you into my home. This is my own space and place. I want to welcome you to join me on a journey of learning about identity, hearing incredible stories. We're going to meet people from all over the world, all walks of life, to hear their story on identity. And as I wrote the book Found, actually there's 9 people that are featured in this book. And we are starting this first episode with one of my favorite stories, one of my favorite people in the book is Cyndi Wilkens. And Cyndi's story is in chapter 2 of Found, so you can go there and read more, but you're going to meet Cyndi today. She's a dynamic speaker and author and actually founder of a ministry called Shine. She travels the world, but there's much beneath all her accomplishments. She's a wife and a mom who found herself, woke up one day to discover that her hands and feet had been amputated. I'm going to let you hear her story directly from Cyndi, but I thank you for joining me. I invite your friends and let's go on this journey of Found. Well, welcome, Cyndi.
I'm so excited
the first
to be
guest
here.
to my podcast.
Very exciting. Everything looks amazing. I'm so excited to share with you today.
Well, thank you. And thank you for sharing your story in my book. I mean, your story is so powerful. We talked on TV.
Yes.
I interviewed you on the 700 Club, Canada, and then you shared the story in the book again. We shared the story, and now we get to sit here face to face and talk as long as we want about this, Cyndi.
Yay!
But I in the story, when I read your story, first and foremost, when the first time I met you, I really was jaw dropped. How anyone could go through all that you've gone through, not just physically, but this journey of identity and purpose. Like when you lose your hands and feet, you kind of lose a sense of who you are, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
And this is what you wrote, okay? This is what I wrote in the book to tell your story. It says, in my world, I went to bed. I was a wife, a business manager, a mother holding my 3-month-old son, and woke up 5 weeks later. Both my hands and both of my feet had been amputated. Take us back to what life was like before this tragic moment. Tell me a little bit more about who was Cyndi before this tragedy occurred.
Well, I have to say, Lorie, that I think if I were to define Cyndi, I still use my quotation marks with my fingers. Can you tell?
Yeah.
If I was to define Cyndi before, I would say that she had a lost identity. Mm-hmm. And I would say that it was lost because I didn't know God. I didn't know my identity in Him. And I looked for things to place my identity in. As a business manager, I was successful. I had traveled up the corporate ladder. And I would find my identity in things I had accomplished.
Right.
And that meant that was me. And one of those things I had accomplished was building our family. Mark and I had much trouble building our family. We had faced so many trials in the first 10 years of our marriage. And so I put my identity in being a mother because it took so much to get there.
Right.
And in all of the things I had accomplished in business. Yet it didn't fulfill me.
Yeah. Yeah.
There was still that emptiness.
Yeah. Tell me a little bit about that struggle of starting your family, because I'm sure there's some watching that right now, that's where they're in that struggle of identity. Even I want to be a mom or a dad. We're having trouble building our family. What did it look like for you guys?
I think it was the darkest period of my life. And that sounds funny coming from somebody who has lost their hands and feet. But, Mark came from an atheist family. I came from a family that had devotionals around the house, but we did not know God. And although I had had this little Bible given to me as a little girl, I took that Bible as I grew up and I put it on a shelf and I never took it back out. And so if you were to, as you asked me, what was it like in our first 10 years of marriage and what were the trials? Well, the fact that that little Bible was on the shelf was exhibited in how we faced those trials.
Yeah.
And we asked the same question over and over again, or I did. Why me?
Why me?
And so as we came together and we were married, Mark's mother passed away. I ached for children. I watched my husband ache for the loss of his mother. He lost his job. We were surrounded with loss.
Wow.
And so I would call it, why me? Why me? And yet I still didn't go to the closet or to the cupboard and take out that little book that would have given me hope. And so when we face that struggle of infertility, and I know that when you face that pain and that suffering in the loss of being able to have a child, it's very dark.
Yeah.
And so when we sat in front of this doctor, he had all our hopes and dreams spread out in front of him in the forms of tests and papers. And he looked down at them and he looked back up and he said, well, you're going to need a test tube baby. And I thought, what does that even mean? How can you say all my hopes and dreams of being a mother are going to result in me having to save money to be a mother? And so I really went into a very dark place, and I would spend my days as a business manager putting on a very bright face.
Right.
But at home, I would cry every night.
Wow.
Our marriage was not in a good place.
Right.
And I ached for children. There were times when it was so dark that I felt I would do anything to just take the pain in my heart away.
Wow. So
I would call out to a God who I didn't know.
Wow.
Because I didn't know him as him.
Yeah.
And finally, after quite a bit of time, we decided to try to adopt. And it was 9 months later that we adopted a baby girl in Florida. We helped deliver her. I cut her cord.
Wow.
And it is a beautiful part in my book, Shine On, where I talk about we went to change her and there was a birthmark on her back in the same spot as mine.
Wow.
And we could see that it was God. We thought our trials were over and we were doing great, and we would just keep going on. And you know, that's what reflects, I think that's what reflects somebody who didn't pull out that book and take hope from it.
Right.
And get to know who God was that I would still not know what my identity was. I didn't know my identity in him.
Yeah.
So I was lost.
Yeah.
And I would look to the good things and they would carry me through. But when I faced pain and suffering, as soon as my prayer was answered, I would just move on.
Right. You know, in the book, thank you for sharing that. I didn't even know all that part of your story. I describe in the book that identity often is based on the things that give us value and worth. But we often are defined by or identified by the things we do. So you said, your identity was all about the things you do, right? Sometimes we're identified by the things that have been done to us, and that can include the pain that we are experiencing in our life, that we become defined by the lack of children.
Yeah.
Right? Like your value and worth was deeply connected to desiring to be a mom. So you were being defined by that loss.
Absolutely.
And I'm sure there's people listening going, I can relate with that. I have been defined by, my identity has been shaped and formed around the things that I don't have, the things that I desire. And then I also talk in the book about we're defined by the things that have maybe been said about us, which I'm sure there's part of all of those things in your journey. So tell me so your identity right now is lost. You don't really know who you are. You're being defined by the things you do, or even the things that you can't have, right? The loss, the lack of. How did you find Christ then? How did you come to the Lord and actually have a personal now relationship, not just this book that's in the closet, but how did you find Christ?
Oh, I had to lose everything to find him.
Wow.
And we eventually had a second little child, a little boy. And once we had him, we thought all our trials were over. But after taking him to the hospital for the croup, I came home and spiked a fever, had a strange ache in my right leg, and was taken to the hospital where, because I was so weak and so sick, I thought we knew that it was time to go to the hospital. So I was taken in an ambulance, and when I arrived, my husband Mark was told I wouldn't make it through the night.
Wow. And your little boy was 3 months old then?
Yes, and our daughter was 5.
Wow.
So, I was immediately induced into a coma, and my husband Mark was told that I had contracted necrotizing fasciitis, which is flesh eating. And I often joke that God had to put me into a place where I'd be very quiet so he could have a long conversation with Mark.
Wow.
Because my husband would tell you he remembers driving to the hospital and thinking to himself that we actually went to the hospital thinking that they would just hook me up to an IV and
You were
send me home.
dehydrated from the flu.
Yeah, I had no idea that I was that severe. So when I presented to the hospital, I had been in kidney failure and septic shock. And my body was preparing to die. And when Mark was told that over the phone on his drive to the hospital, he felt this incredible sense of sadness and loss, and just the knowledge that he at that time thought everything that he had done in his life that had been sinful was being put onto me, which is not how it works with God. Right. But he didn't know either.
He didn't know God either.
He thought I was suffering because of our marriage falling apart and everything else. So at the hospital, I was put into a medically induced coma where every one of my organs failed.
Wow.
And expected to have a high chance of brain damage. So every day my husband was told it's time to remove the life support. But the moment that he heard I was in the coma, he sat in a hospital room and picked up a Bible. And he started listening to the Bible. And he formed a personal saving relationship with God.
Wow. So listening to the Bible meaning audible.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
I mean, that's amazing.
Everywhere he drove, everything he did.
Did you have people in your life that had been speaking to you about a personal relationship with God, or like there must be some people that maybe
he was actually invited to church about 2 weeks in of my fight for life.
Wow.
He was invited into a church with the children by a friend who brought him in, and the church was praying for us.
Wow. Just how timely is that?
This church became the hands and feet of Christ's little church. Wow. And it was just amazing how they reached out into our lives and how they brought us this beautiful image of helping, loving, supporting. And so as I fought for my life, Mark was faced daily with the option of ending it.
Right.
And I think, Lorie, I was thinking as I was driving here that was the moment probably where Mark found his identity. And it was because he knew that the choice of life was not his.
Right.
It wasn't his choice to make.
Yeah.
And so he prayed for God to show him what to do under great pressure.
Yeah. And the question of identity is, is this life valuable? Is this life valuable? Do I have value and worth? And in this case, Mark's like, is Cyndi's life, valuable enough that he's fighting for your life in many ways, wasn't he?
Yes. And you spoke about being defined. At that moment, I was defined by the medical system as she's not going to make it. And if she does make it, he was told, if she does make it, think about what kind of life she will have, because she probably won't have hands and feet.
Right.
And so everything looked like there would be no hope.
And he decided, I'll never forget in the story, and it's as we watch, and people can look up the story and view it, whether through 700 Club Canada, the story we did on you, or other videos, that Mark really cried out to God.
He did.
And he really, I hear now how that was the moment of him really finding his relationship in Christ and his dependence.
Yeah.
And that your life had value because you're you're created and made in the image of God. And how quickly he came to that realization is stunning to me. And he fought for your life. You were 5 months in a coma.
5 weeks, yes.
5 weeks,
yes,
sorry.
yeah,
5 weeks in this coma. So what happened when you woke up?
It's just as you read earlier. It's like I went to sleep one night and awoke the next. But Mark was standing over me, and the look of love in his blue eyes, it was not explainable. I couldn't even describe the depth of love. And he told me, you've been very ill, honey, and they've had to amputate your hands and feet. And, as a woman,
Right.
let's fit our nails, our manis and petties, our bonding with our little girls over manis and petties, all of that.
Everything you touch, literally everything you touch with your hands. Like I can't imagine. I mean, the chapter your story's in, I titled it Identity Lost. And you physically lost part of yourself. Yeah. But how much are we defined even by our own bodies?
Absolutely.
Our security and, who we are is so much connected to our physical appearance too. It can be very connected to. So all this is going through your mind.
And the idea of losing all of that, not just losing them, as you mentioned, physically, but losing them the chance to do the things I thought I would do with my family.
Right.
And I would hear people say, everybody was encouraging, but you hear the odd person, and some people would say, well, she probably won't go home.
Right.
There was question if I could wear prosthetic legs.
Right.
And so I was in a very, very inconceivable dark place, thinking, how would I even feed my son his bottle?
Right. He's 3 months old.
Yeah.
Well, now he's 4.5 months old.
Yeah, and I had just been holding him in my arms and rubbing his head with my fingers. You know how you do with your little baby.
Yeah.
And now they were hours away. I was in downtown Toronto, and
right. How long were you in Toronto then, away from your family?
I was in hospital 5 months.
5 months.
Yeah.
Okay. Wow.
And but various hospitals, and so the idea that I was in a dark place and that there was how on earth I was going to get through, I had no idea.
Oh, for sure. I mean, you say in the book, you and Mark were facing an identity crisis.
Absolutely.
Right? I mean, this was huge. And you say, too often our circumstances pull us to change who we thought we were, when in fact we need to look to God more than ever in the chaos of changing circumstances. I mean, this is a powerful truth, but for many, we can be defined by our circumstances, right? And we can't move forward. So, how did you and Mark come to this place of understanding that, wow, you're going to move forward with this? This is your new normal.
Yeah.
How did you come to, who are you going to be now? You're not going to be defined by what you were before. Who are you going to be now? How did you move forward?
Well, we needed that pivotal moment where we found that identity. And that came after visiting my children and realizing that this was going to take a lot of healing.
Yeah.
And healing that a human could not do.
Yes.
And that's a deep emotional healing, a heart healing. And my heart had been wounded so many times, it needed to be healed from the inside out. Nurses would know that wounds need to be healed from the inside out.
Yeah.
And so I needed that. And I spent hours crying in my room, crying out to God. At the moment, I was in a hospital room in downtown Toronto, trauma unit. I could barely turn my head. I had more machines and wires in my body than I could have even imagined. And I was on kidney dialysis. And I remember just crying out to him and saying, why are you letting this happen to me? I thought that I had lived my life as a good person. I thought, my identity was not there. And a beautiful nurse came in and she opened up a book and she said, I'm going to read to you. And she read me Psalm 139.
Yeah.
And she said the words, you knit me together in my mother's womb.
Yeah.
I praise you, for I am fearfully and wonderfully made. Lorie, in that moment, I had this beautiful vision of the space and time as we don't know it. and the universe and me being woven together in my mother's womb. But it wasn't about that little baby in my mother's womb. It was about the love that was poured into the creation of that little baby.
Yes.
And the purpose that God had for that little baby, which wasn't just me, it's all of us.
Yeah.
And in that moment, I knew he existed. And I knew that I needed him. Yeah. There was no way I could overcome this without him.
Right. Hey friends, thanks so much for joining me on this journey of Found. Now the podcast, it's an extension, of course, of the book Found. There's a video series. This message of identity and purpose, I just want to share it so that we all know not only who we are, but what God has called us to. And I hope that you're finding it encouraging today. Would you do me a favor? We'd love for more people to be on this journey of Found. Subscribe on the podcast or the YouTube channel, Lorie Hartshorn. You can find me at Lorie Hartshorn in all places, social media as well. How about make a comment? I'd love to hear from you. Send me your thoughts, your questions. We'll continue the conversation together. But thanks for joining me on this journey of Found, and please share it with others. Now back to the conversation. That's incredible that nurse did that. I mean, what a God-given moment. And the fact that she paid attention to your deepest need.
Yeah.
Because if we find our value, our worth in all the circumstances around us, the things we have or don't have, the things we've accomplished or haven't accomplished, all of that falls apart. And you're just, to me, the picture of when things are taken from you, the things that maybe you found security in, literally your hands and feet.
Yeah.
Okay, most of us could not relate to that dramatic of a loss. Then who are you? And she walks in the room and tells you who you are, that you are dearly loved by God, that you're created by him. That Psalm 139 is one of my favorites, Cyndi, because it unpacks how, like, God knew us before before we were even, in existence in our mother's womb. Every day ordained for us, he knew before one of them came to be.
Yes.
And you matter to God. And that's your biggest identity. That overrides everything else in life, right?
Yeah.
How did you lead into that truth then, moving forward? How did you hold on to that? How did that change you, the way you started working through the loss?
That's a fabulous question, Lorie. And I think that I had to come to terms with the knowledge that I may never know why this happened to me, but God had purpose in it regardless.
Right.
And I think that's what we face when we face really difficult times, is coming to the place to say, I know that I may never know why, but I know that I can shine him regardless. And so I've had to live a life of surrender to him in everything.
Right.
And people often say, how hard is it to walk on prosthetic legs? And I honestly, that took maybe 3 or 4 weeks to start to learn how to do.
Right.
It would take a lot longer to get the condition to be able to do it. But living without hands, where everything is made for people with hands,
right,
will be forever. It will be the rest of my life where I could walk into a room and not know how I'm going to get in, how I'm going to sit down, how I'm going to brush my teeth or even take care of my children. At that time, it was all about how I would take care of my children and be a mom again.
Yeah.
And so leaning into the knowledge that God had great purpose before I was born, that God is there with me and he has great purpose for the future. It helps you to see everything as temporary.
That's good.
It helps you to see the pain as temporary, leaning into the knowledge that he is the healer.
Yeah.
You're not responsible for it.
Yeah.
You can give it to him and help and work with him for him to conform you into the image of his son, because he uses all things, turns them into good for those who love him, so that we can be conformed into the image of his son. And in that knowledge, it's so much easier to take that foot and take that step towards healing and take that step towards the next thing that's that bit closer to finding who you are and what his purpose is for you.
I love that I feel identity and purpose are so closely connected. And in my book Found, I talk about that a lot, that we want to know what God's purpose is for our life. And that's where it's like, why this God? Because, but once we know who we are, and who we belong to, then our purpose becomes so much more clear, doesn't it? And we're able to get past whether it's the loss of limbs like you have experienced, or it's the loss of a relationship, or it's the loss of the ability, maybe it's a job or even money or the ability to have children, right? These things that we put so much of our value in.
We do.
It's actually, even in spite of the loss of things, we can have purpose. In fact, maybe our purpose comes as a result of the loss. Maybe we wouldn't see it. Do you think that maybe you would have, like, who would you be if you hadn't lost your limbs, Cyndi? Do you think you would have missed God's purpose for you in some ways, that you'd go back to your old way of defining yourself?
Oh, well, I'll tell you, Mark and I have had this conversation many times. Who would we be today if we had not have found him?
Right.
And our identity in him. And I truly believe I had to come to the end of everything to find him.
I think we all do. I think your story is just so traumatic in some ways, right? Because so few of us could relate to what you have experienced in the physical loss of your limbs. And yet we all have lost. And we have to take that loss and say, Lord, okay, who am I in spite of this loss?
Yeah.
And at the core, we can find our true self. It almost strips away. I talk in my book about losing my voice. Certainly isn't as traumatic as what you've experienced, but it was a traumatic loss for me at the time.
Absolutely.
That singing and speaking obviously is a calling on my life, and music was a huge part of my life. And I lost my voice. I was away at school on a music degree, and now I couldn't sing. And I was defined by that. But when it was taken away from me, actually the truth is I found who I really was.
Yes.
My identity was not about my voice. My identity was about finding my relationship, my value, my worth, my belonging in God.
Yeah.
And then my purpose started to emerge out of a loss.
It's just amazing what he can take and turn. And it just takes our faith in his ability. And it's so easy to say, well, the world can't take it and make it into something good, and forget that he can.
He can. Yeah. I mean, what a story. Tell us how you've got this great YouTube channel called How Does She Do That, right?
Yes.
And you start, even at the beginning, I got to catch up to the YouTube channel and see all the things that you show us how to do. But one of the first things you wanted to learn was to put mascara and lipstick on. Like, how do you practically do that? Like, how have you learned to do some of the things you are doing without your hands, particularly?
I have to tell you, every time I do, I know it's not me. It's just by God's grace. But when it was my makeup, it was when I just, even in the hospital, I just wanted to have mascara and lipstick on. It's just that little bit that makes you feel a little bit more ready for the day. And so when I arrived home, friends had made me a little piece of wood, and they placed the mascara and the lipstick in the wood. So I would just have to lift off the lid whenever I wanted to use it and just apply it.
Wow.
But after a while, my small motor skills without fingers developed, because our bodies are made so amazing that I can just put on my makeup. I do all my own makeup. There's always going to be something you can't do.
Yeah.
But I'm not going to focus on that.
Yeah.
I'm going to focus on what I can do.
Okay, there it is right there. Cyndi, you are a can-do person. You have overcome so many obstacles because you have a can-do attitude. Where does that come from? Were you always like that, or?
Well, I have to say I have a can-do God.
There you go.
But people often ask me that. I think it's the knowledge of who I am in him, because I still hear voices that say I'm not good enough. I see people who look at me. I'm an immediate physical representation of loss.
Right.
And as soon as you see me, you will know I've lost.
Yeah.
And so knowing that it doesn't matter that I don't have hands and feet, no matter how you see me, I have a God who says I'm whole.
Yeah.
And I think that can carry me through some of the darkest times of feeling like I don't look whole. And there's times when I wake up in the morning and I know how hard it is to live a life without hands and feet, and it's hard.
Yeah, I bet.
But I love that I can rely on him to help me be that can-do person.
Yeah, I love it. You said on page 15 in Found, living without limbs would not define Cyndi. God would. You're not defined by your loss of limbs. You're defined by God.
Yeah,
And this helps you in your everyday struggles.
absolutely.
You have a higher purpose. You've got, meaning and purpose in your life. I think it's just such a beautiful illustration to all of us. So what does life look like now? Okay, this can-do woman who literally travels the world. You were literally just telling me about this amazing story that you've been to Nepal.
Yes.
I mean, able-bodied people, can we just say, many of us, I've been to India and Calcutta. It was the hardest thing I ever did. How did you overcome the obstacles? And there are many when you're traveling. How do you overcome that?
I think, again, I'll have to tell you a little story. I'm going to just give you a little story about, I think it's a story of the knowledge that I don't have to have my own courage. I think that's what God has taught me. I don't need to rely on my own courage. I don't need to rely on my own strength. I can rely on his.
Yeah.
And we'd been traveling through Nepal. It had been a tough day. I had been maneuvering underdeveloped country with lack of, accessibility. And I say that God keeps me humble in Nepal. And it's true. And I'd been speaking in a mountainous region. We'd traveled 12 hours there and 12 hours home on a little van through the Himalayas. And we arrived at this little washroom stop, which was also a gas station. And as I got out of the car, there was a man there who he looked at me, and I knew he was thinking that I had done something to deserve my physical state. And it breaks my heart when that happens, because I know that sometimes people think that. Yeah. And so I was already in a very tired and emotionally drained spot. And so I walked to the washroom, and in that little 4x4 metal room that is, I had a long conversation with God, and I cried out. I heard all the things that I had heard about my identity before. Like, you're not good enough, and you're not whole, and you couldn't even have children of your own, and you couldn't do this, and you couldn't do that. In my very weak moment, it was all coming at me, because that's when it comes at us. Yeah. And I know everybody's faced a moment like this. Mm-hmm. But knowing that chapter in Ephesians that tells me that I am chosen, I am adopted, I am redeemed, and knowing those words have great power in fighting off that feeling. Mm-hmm. And so I tried to find the courage to go out and tell this man that that all the things that God had made me, that no matter what, and no matter how you see me, I'm more whole now than I was with hands and feet. Wow. Because of him. And as I walked out to him, our dear friend Shusma and my friend Ruth Coghill were handing him my book that had been translated into Nepalese, and this man's face lit up. He had been told my story from our translator Shusma, and he looked so excited to hear it. And I didn't have to do anything except have the courage to walk back out of that washroom, because God took care of everything. Wow. And God is now showing that man in this little tiny community his identity. Yeah. He was loved before he was created. God has great purpose for him. Yeah. And so, when we have the courage that doesn't have to be our own, and we have that courage to step out for him, he opens the doors.
So good.
So good. He will take it.
Yeah.
And he will do what he needs to do with it. And in that, you will find his purpose.
Yeah. 100%.
And it might just mean sharing your story with somebody, one person, about how God took you through.
That's right.
It might mean telling lots of people. Yeah. But he's in it. Yeah. And his identity is in it. And his love and his purpose for you is in it.
Well, I just love that, Cyndi. Like, every one of us, no matter where our status, our station in life. I mean, I've been to India too. It's a hard place.
It is.
And yet, every single person is made in the image of God. We are all made to reflect God in this world. That is our design. That is our purpose. Our identity and purpose is to be his representative, his reflection, his image bearer, like a mirror, which I illustrate in the book, that Jesus came to represent God. He is the mirror image or image of God. And we are to look at Jesus and we will find who we are to reflect, right? And so it doesn't matter what's happened in our life, what we have or don't have, what's been done to us, what's happened to us, our state or status in life. We are all loved and made in God's image, and therefore we share in his purpose. So I just love that you're living out God's purpose in your life in ways that, had you not gone through this loss, you might never have known. You might never have known him personally. You might never have known the joy and purpose it is to shine who he is in the world, right?
Yes.
It's just so incredibly beautiful. What would you say to people then? Any final thoughts about what does it mean to find your identity and your purpose, your value in a relationship with Christ, rather than looking to other things?
I think once you find your value in your relationship in Christ, you can look at the pain in your life and you can say that by walking through that pain with him, you are a different person. You are in his identity for you, in his identity and who you are because of him.
Yeah.
And then you can shine his light. And I feel so blessed that we've been able to do that, whether it's by the YouTube channel or the podcast. And I'm working on a children's book, which I'm super excited about.
Amazing.
Turning the book into a screenplay, which I'm very excited about. Who would think that those things,
Right?
those things could happen, but for a God who can do abundantly more?
Yeah. And you keep walking in that, girl. I'm telling you.
Thank you.
I mean, your stories inspired me. That's why it was actually the first story in the book that I wanted people to read. And anything else God's continued to teach you in these days is you've written this children's book. You've got your YouTube channel. How does she do that?
Yes.
Right? Where can people find you?
Actually, you can find me at shineonmissions.com.
Okay.
That's our mission. We have our mission that assists families globally in crisis. We bring hope into their world when they're facing darkness.
Yeah.
And you can find my podcast, my website, my YouTube channel, and all of the initiatives that we as Shine On Missions are doing.
shineonmissions.com?
Yes, and you can sign up for the newsletter to be a part of some of these exciting new things. So.
Well, I just think it's so beautiful. Can we say not just the redemption in your life, but the continued writing of God's story. And this really, I've told you this several times, but to me, you're just a walking illustration of what it looks like to walk in your true identity in Christ. You're not letting loss define you. You're not letting certainly your achievements define you, because now you're doing lots of stuff, but you're not doing it because it defines you.
No.
You're doing it because it's a natural outpouring of who you are and who God created you to be. There's a difference, isn't there?
There is knowing that you're doing it for Jesus.
Yeah. And from a place of this internal knowing that it's really not, you're not trying to, drum up some, self-affirmation. It's like, actually, you know who you are in Christ. And It's from that strength and courage, that place, that you can step out into all these unknowns.
And it'll allow us and give us the ability to step into the dark places, the scary places, the places that we think there's no way.
Yeah.
I can't.
That's right.
But knowing him takes us places we never imagined we'd go.
Well, and you're gone there and keep going there.
Thank you.
We'll keep in touch and keep following your story. And thank you for sharing it with me. I encourage you to get the book Found so that you can read Cyndi's story. But as you can see, it's just a glimpse of her story. You want to go to shineonministries.com to learn more about Cyndi. Would you subscribe to LorieHartshorn.com? That's how people find this.
Absolutely.
Right? Subscribe to the YouTube channel, go to my website, and let's share this story, this episode with more people so they can know that your loss does not define you. Christ defines you. And when you walk in your relationship with Jesus, anything is possible, right? That's where you find joy and purpose.
Exactly.
Yeah. Thank you for joining me here today, Cyndi.
Thank you.
Yeah. And thank you for joining us on the Found podcast. Thanks for hanging out with us on the Found podcast. I hope you're feeling encouraged and excited to step into everything God has for you. Don't forget to follow and subscribe so you won't miss a single episode. And if today's show encouraged you, please share it with friends and give us a shout out on social media. We'd love to hear from you. Thanks for listening, and we'll catch you next time.